Fiery embrace. Original sin. Good news. Crucifixion.
We have seen that, in a civilization deeply rooted in the sin of the flesh, fellow citizens come, in this tolerance of cruelty to animals, to commit the same among themselves. This is how a mechanism of oppression is developed, arranged hierarchically and to the extent of the impiety of each one. However, the most hypocritical, the most ungodly appropriate the overhanging places and justify all their infamy to the extent of the general tolerance of their subjects. In turn, integrity becomes perilous by the fact that it attacks the hierarchy of social powers in parallel. So God came, through the perfect life of Jesus, to make us see indisputably that our legislative regime was just as perilous for us as it was towards animals. The crucifixion of Jesus and the fate of the apostles are the full demonstration of the original advices of Genesis. Integrity thus becomes the most perilous path on earth. Yet it is the path that comes to the rescue of everyone, including the mountains, the sky, the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom. Grief extended from the bowels of the earth to the sun when Jesus was crucified. Our great defender had left us in favor of our worst oppressors.
Death chronometry.
Let us make a parenthesis here that demonstrates how much the evangelists agreed, or were called to agree, that it was very important to commemorate in writing the primacy of Mary Magdalene for Jesus. The Gospels are not very long texts. One could say that these are novels of about 70 pages each, chronicling above all about the last 3 years of Jesus' life and teaching with a short introduction to his childhood. These texts are repeated for the largest portion 4 times. Their reading indicates a concern of the apostles to testify to the facts, but also, and above all, to certify and complete the testimony of the other evangelists. The New Testament and the work of the apostles are a work that has thus ensured the sustainability of the ideology despite the great persecution it has suffered over the centuries. Thus, given the fact that these texts are very brief, any enumeration of futile and repetitive appearance must necessarily hide an important meaning. This is the case with the systematic mention of the hours described during the crucifixion. It was at the 3rd hour that Jesus was undressed and crucified with horror. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, there was darkness and a sort of storm. At the 9th hour Jesus died and the sanctuary curtain tore apart. Let's recall that the curtain of the sanctuary was used since Moses to receive splashes of blood from animals sacrificed in the temple. It was a ritual reminiscent of the last plague in Egypt, where the Jews had painted the outside of the doors of their home to avoid being struck by the exterminating angel. However, on the curtain, it is a question of appealing this vengeance no longer against the pharaohs outside the house, but against the practitioners of the infamous sacrifices. In reality, the tearing of the curtain, followed by the toil of the disciples against the sacrifices in the temple, and finally the destruction of the temple by the Romans several times destroyed the Jewish priesthood and actually stopped the sacrifices. For the priests were nourished from the offerings of Jewish sinners, unable to make any more offerings according to the rites, and finally without an altar or temple, the offerings ceased to feed the religious. Ultimately we can say that the tearing of the temple's curtain at the death of Jesus is what put an end to the long despised by God sacrificial mores, as revealed by the biblical texts throughout the centuries. Apart from what the Spirit of Jesus means by this tearing of the sanctuary curtain after his death is that he does not demand justice against the Jews who condemned him. He doesn't want his sacrifice blood to be doused on it. On the contrary, he wants to stop all sacrifice. And this idea shows how fundamental this last prodigy is to Christianity and to the support of our positions against the fiery anger. All the while, according to all the Gospels, women, especially Mary Magdalene, watched helplessly the death of Jesus. In John's Gospel it is said that the disciple whom Jesus loved was at the foot of the cross, and Jesus entrusted the custody of his mother Mary to this disciple, and asked his mother to consider him as her son for consolation. But this event would have taken place just before the death, between the 6th hour and the 9th hour if one relates to all the Gospels. On the other hand, an apocryphal writing, the Acts of John, deftly conceals that John was instead hidden and terrorized by the events, in a cave on the Mount of Olives before Jesus was crucified and throughout his agony. Thus, it can be understood at least for this portion that the disciple whom Jesus loved at the foot of the cross, to whom Jesus entrusted his mother, was Mary Magdalene. It is also this cross-gospel description of the last hours of Jesus' life that makes it possible to assume that Mary Magdalene was the disciple laying against Jesus at the Last Supper. This idea shows that Christianity has no connection with chastity except that of covering up the identity of lovers. Yes, obviously the Creator made us sexual. And that's a beautiful thing. It still seems that John still wanted to put Mary Magdalene under cover by identifying himself as the disciple Jesus loved, to rely on the visibly voluntary disorder within his account in the Acts of John.